Good afternoon, everyone. I am Councilman Stokes. I chair the Education Committee, but this actual hearing is a committee as a whole, and we want to get started. So I want to start off by reading the actual legislation oversight that was drafted. For the purposes of holding an oversight hearing regarding school safety for students, faculty, and staff, and placement of at-risk youth within the Baltimore City school system, to increase responsiveness to recent incidents of violence and bullying among students, and the school district's response and plans to be proactive with at-risk students. We're still waiting for some of the council to be here. I want to mention Mr. Green, who is chairing this committee of a whole, staff. Before we start, I know Dr. Sandalisa has a presentation, so we want to start off with that. So we are going to start off with the school system presentation, and I think the SAO, will have a presentation also? Okay, that's fine. So we'll start off with Dr. Sandalisa on her presentation.
Ooh, it's all fancy. Good afternoon, Chair Stokes. It is great to be here this afternoon at City Council. I come with many members of the City Council team. So we have Major Norman Coleman, who is acting Chief of Baltimore City School Police, Chief of Staff Allison Perkins Cohen, who stepped away for a bit, our Legislative Director Melissa Broom. We also have Stacy Place-Jose, who is a Deputy Chief of Schools, who will be acting Chief of Schools soon. We have Seema Shaw-Nelson. Did I say your full name right? Thank you. Who is my special assistant, who has been working on violence and culture in schools. We also have our Executive Director for Student Wholeness. Are you doctor yet? Soon to be, Dr. Sonia Goodwin. We have the head of our Re-Engagement Center and storied Baltimore City School former principal and principal supervisor, the esteemed Mr. Roger Shaw. We also have with us Councilman, the board chair of our school, our board of commissioner of school safety and wholeness, who is with us. Oh, and he just stepped away. He took a phone call, but Commissioner Muhammad is here. And then we have our comms team with us, Andre Riley, and, oh Lord, I am blanking. Sherry Christian, that's what it is. I was just gonna call you Sherry. I did, that's what it is. And Sherry Christian's with us.
Madam
that's who we
CEO,
have.
Before you start, I just want to introduce Pamela Chung, Chief of Juvenile Services, SAO, and the Deputy Chief, Ms. Catherine Roseblatt. Also, we have Deputy Commissioner Jones here also. Did I leave anybody out? Oh, we have Ms. Lisa Gary from DGS also, so you can proceed.
Okay. Good to see everyone. So thank you. Good evening. I didn't get to see you, Councilman Cohen, as you came in.
I'm sorry. That's my responsibility. I should have did that.
Oh, sorry.
I'd like to acknowledge the councilman from the 1st District, Councilman Z. Cohen.
Good to see you. So we will keep this within, a 7 to 10 minute time frame. There's a lot of information, and I know that the council members will have questions after, so we can go in more detail. Thank you. So you'll see the categories quickly that we will touch on initially, as was outlined in the rationale for this hearing, the focus of this hearing. And so we'll begin with the first item, first area, which is wholeness and our school climate strategy. What you'll see are the major components here. We actually have a dedicated position that we added to the Office of Student Conduct and Attendance in 2020. We are currently conducting the search for that, but you'll see that the 6 major areas: restorative practices, social emotional learning, culture and climate, safety, mediation, the updated code of conduct, and healing-centered approaches are all bodies of work that really contribute to the overall growth and improvement of school climate at the school level. You'll see there underneath each area some of the highlights. One area that we know we have also heard a lot about is bullying. We know, for example, that bullying is an increased challenge in schools, and so we actually added a position under the direction of Executive Director Goodwin around school bullying specifically. And you'll see here, I think for the public, with the official definition, when we describe bullying or categorize bullying at the school level, you'll see these 2 major characteristics, one having to do with frequency and the other something related to the imbalance of power between students and different groups. You'll see that in the continuum of support for bullying, as we've seen an uptick, you'll see that there's prevention and awareness with everything from QR codes for easy reporting purposes for students and families, all the way to peer mediation, which is an area that is growing. We're contracting with CDRUM to train staff and students for peer mediation. You'll also see the morning meeting and advisory, which were things that we began in earnest, frankly, during the pandemic, that really are grounding the understanding of how young people and students can build community within schools. So we know there's been an uptick, but our support for bullying has increased fairly significantly over the last number of years. You'll see also that support corresponds to, frankly, an increased occurrences of bullying within the schools, and so you'll see some of the intervention, supports, and corrective action data as listed here. Most notably, you'll see the really sharp uptick, particularly in areas with regards to parent outreach, student conferencing, student-parent conferencing, and also increases in areas like out-of-school suspensions and in-school suspensions. I think the important pieces to know is that there's a continuum, and that as we've seen the incidences and the need increase, we've also increased both supports and corrective actions. You'll also see the work here with regards to our healing-centered crisis response work. You'll see some of the strategies that we've listed here with regards to making sure that we have a robust crisis response. The level of response really does vary when you look here on the severity of the incident and the number of students and staff involved. Sorry, my old eyes, I can't see the print. So what you'll see here within these areas is everything from the individualized supports for adults and students, really all the way to what does the ongoing support look like after there is an incident. So that's an area that we have grown out fairly intentionally and deliberately. With regards to safe passage, the work around safe passage really began when we coordinated our work with MONSE. They coordinated it under former Director Jackson. We began and provided we were provided additional supports at Mondawmin and the State Center. You'll see that these areas were those that were identified across the city for additional support. You'll see that most of the support here was also coordinated through school police and school administrators initially. Over the long long term, the responsibility ongoing for school administrators became a little too much, and so we realized we couldn't continue it in that particular form. And Dr. Brooks, with the Mayor's Office of Children and Families, is currently leading this initiative. So both Major Coleman and Dr. Brooks are continuing to have that citywide view, particularly on these key transport areas, because we know that transportation to and from school is also an area where we need increased safety. The other piece that I think is important to highlight is our support of at-risk students. So we have reimagined under Mr. Shaw, Executive Director Shaw's vision, our re-engagement center intake process and our follow-up and supports. This was really, and good afternoon to Councilman Torrance. This work was really centered around what we saw as the gap between young people leaving DJS and re-entering schools. And under Mr. Shaw's leadership, what we've seen is, frankly, a more robust intake process that includes everything from mentoring for students as they leave, as they exit the DJS facility, all the way to specialists that support the increase in the number of DJS youth. I had the opportunity this summer to meet some of these youth and to really see how their engagement in productive activity and frankly seeing purpose beyond what their experience was has increased. The number and the number of young people who frankly are not falling through the gaps. You'll see on the next slide some pictures. That's a picture of some of our DJS youth who had the opportunity to engage in job exposure over the summer. Before re-entering schools. You'll also see here just a summary of where those points of support we have invested city schools resources in, everything from increased interaction with case managers, the bi-weekly meetings regarding student placement, so it's not as if they're just placed in schools, which is what would happen previously, but there's far more robust follow-up now given the number of people that we are involving with that. You'll also see on this slide the supporting at-risk students, and one of the areas highlighted here is an area that school leaders have flagged as a particular area of concern that we have been focusing on, and that is safety transfers. And so because of the way that safety transfers have kind of left some schools vulnerable to young people who might have had kind of violent interactions or histories, we have kind of doubled down on this transfer process. We have a cross-functional team working on this, including my special assistant, Seema Shaw Nelson, who you met earlier, so that cross-functional team is really looking at what are the areas where we can make sure that when a safety transfer has to occur, school leaders are getting the information that they need and are getting it in a timely way. We are also investing in a transfer ambassador. And this transfer ambassador will actually help with a lot of what school leaders were telling us, and that is there needs to be something in between the information that drove the need for a safety transfer and the arrival of that student in the new school. It's also identifying victims of crime within this process, as well as the accused or the perpetrator. And then, as we near the end, you'll see some bodies of developing work that we are continuing to grow within city schools. This data tracking to identify at-risk students is something that I'd like to highlight because, again, one of the things that we have realized is that the intersections of variety of areas coming together, all have different data points, and so actually tracking the data to identify students both proactively and as part of the process is very important. And then I will highlight the increase in gang activity outside of our schools in neighborhoods is impacting schools and is another area that our school leaders have focused for additional support. I want to thank Commissioner Mohammed for his leadership and assistance as we build this out, because it really is cross-functional work when we are talking about how we mitigate gang impact in schools, because it's not the same as in neighborhoods, but it clearly impacts us. And then finally, I will close, Mr. Chair, with just updating the council on the current search for the city schools chief of police. We all know that Chief Akil Ham retired recently, and so we are working very closely with public sector search and consulting to identify our next chief of police. That organization was identified and selected because of their work and track record in actually placing heads of safety and security. They will source, recruit, vet qualified candidates. And one of the things that I'd like to highlight for the council today is the stakeholder engagement process. And within that stakeholder engagement process, and we can certainly provide you with more information, we are looking at critical stakeholders, everyone from school level personnel, young people, neighborhood leaders, around feedback about what we need in our next city schools chief of police. And with that, I think I am under my mark. Am I, sir?
You passed.
Okay, great. I got a passing grade. You know, that's important. And so I will turn it back to you, sir.
So I want to now acknowledge Councilman Torrance from the 7th District, also Tiffany Macklin from President Mosey's office, Mr. Tyler from Mayor Scott's office also. Before we start, I do it a little different because we usually, the council people, ask all the questions, but people came here to testify, and I think we owe them to testify first. So I have 3 young men that I sit in the back that I convince, because they go to school, they should feel safe when they're in school and when they're leaving school. So I'm going to call Jalen Reed. Jalen, come on up. You got to push that mic down for him, somebody can. Pull it and identify yourself and tell us what school you go to, Jalen.
Hello, my name is Jalen Reed. I attend Baltimore Collegiate School for Boys. So I just want to say I want to feel safe while I'm attending school and when I'm not attending school. So I just feel like we can have more security surrounding the school, or at least by the school. I can feel more safe while I'm in school or not in school.
Thank you, Jalen. Kyle Reed.
My name is Kyle Reed. I attend Baltimore Collegiate School for Boys. I feel like us as students, we should have safety in school and out of school.
Thank you. Xavion Timmons.
Hello, my name is Xavion Timmons, and I think that we should have safety in and out of school, at least on school hours as well, because it's bad enough that we live in Baltimore, and Baltimore has a whole bunch of gun violence and gang violence, and not a place for kids that's trying to make it out of Baltimore and try to make a living for themselves.
Thank you. We need to get a round of applause. Just take a whole lot to come up and do that. Thank you. Nicole Chang.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Councilman. First, I would like to say thank you, Dr. Santelice, for your presentation. Having worked not only in our schools, but in our communities.
Could
Can
you
hear
tell
me
us
now?
where you're from?
I'm sorry. My name is Nicole Chang. I'm here on behalf of our Legacy and the NAACP.
Thank you.
Having worked inside of our schools as a wholeness specialist, I have been firsthand to many of these violence. Many of the information that Dr. Santeliza has presented, I have seen firsthand how they are working and they are improving. I just want to touch on a few things. In 2017, City Schools invested training in teachers and admins in restorative practices, a technique used to help students share their concerns and resolve conflict. While this was working, however, over the past year, reported incidents of violence of bullying in our city schools have risen exponentially, highlighting a disturbing trend that necessitates immediate action. These incidents have contributed to an atmosphere of fear and instability, significantly impacting the learning environment and overall well-being of students, teachers, and staff. To effectively address the recent surge in violence and bullying, it is crucial to implement a comprehensive strategy aimed at increasing responsiveness to these incidents. While Dr. Santeliza has certainly highlighted a few more in detail, she has touched on many of the same things that I would like to address. One being enhanced security measures, as our young students talked about, implementing additional security protocols, including increased presence of school officers, enhanced surveillance systems, and strict access control measures to deter instances of violence and promptly address security concerns. Mental health support, providing expanded access to mental health resources and counseling services for students affected by violence or bullying, as well as implementing proactive interventions to address the underlying causes of aggressive behaviors. It is no longer just the students who are being bullied that are affected, but the students that have to watch this, see it, and hear it. Community engagement, which is something that Baltimore City School has continued to do an impressive job of, but must continue to grow with our community partners, families, local law enforcement, and organizations. We're talking grassroots organizations, the people that are actually putting boots to the ground. One of the things that I often hear not enough people talk about is parent accountability. Recognizing the essential role of parents in shaping their children's behavior, it is imperative to hold parents accountable for their child's behavior. This may involve establishing clear expectations for parent involvement, providing resources for parent education and support, and implementing measures to ensure parents are actively engaged in addressing and preventing their child's involvement in bullying or bullying behavior. Thank you.
Well, all I can say is amen to that. Only saying that is because we hold our school system accountable, hold us accountable, hold the police department. We got to hold the parents accountable. Everybody got to be in the same room. You can't just pick 3 people and forget about the real persons that should be held accountable. Thank you. Karen Rivera.
Good afternoon, Councilman. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Karen Rivera. I am the climate lead for Collington Square Elementary Middle School. I'm also a community leader. And first of all, thank you, Dr. Santeliza, for your amazing presentation. And it really does describe what we are doing in Baltimore City Schools. I think before we take a comprehensive look at what is happening right now, even though many people want to kind of dismiss COVID, we need to understand that we are still dealing with the effects of the lack of social emotional learning that children, they experience that learning in schools. So they have not received that for 2 years. That's number one. This surge in crime has to do with many of the kids that did not return to school. This is something that we have to address, like my sister said, as a community. And parent accountability is very important. But with that parent accountability, we have to understand that we have to approach this from a restorative space and from a trauma space, because they cannot impart into their children what they do not have themselves. That's number one. Number two is we need to stop trying to entertain opportunists that come in with fine-tooth combs and try to pick apart the things and the work that we do every day on the ground. Every Monday night quarterback sounds good. Everyone. That's not hard to do. I can come in and I can look at everyone's job and position and role, and I can pick something out that you're not doing. That doesn't help the problem. What we need to do is stop operating in silos and work together and honor each other's gifts and abilities. If I know that you're good at something, then I need to humble myself and ask for help. One of the biggest problems we have is we ask from our students things that we don't model ourselves. We want them to stop bullying, but we bully each other. We need to start holding each other accountable and stop entertaining nonsense, because that's what it is. People are dying. Young people are dying. And the only way that we can solve this is everybody can't have a seat at the table, but everyone should have a voice at the table. And we are responsible for allowing the voices to be at the table. Thank you.
Thank you. Dyson Brooks. Dason, I'm sorry.
How you doing, everybody? My name is Dason Brooks. I am the founder and CEO of a nonprofit organization that helps over 180 kids across Baltimore City in over 41 Baltimore City schools. The reason we are here today is because I'm sure many of us have seen that horrific, hinderous, disgusting video plastered across our social media feeds. That kid was a kid that I consistently worked with in his elementary school, and a kid that I followed as he went to that particular school. Now, the dad told me not to come up here and speak too much about the situation because his kid is still healing, and he will be healing for his entire life. He will be 20, 30, 40 years old, still dealing with the trauma that that video will inflict upon him. I questioned whether I should come up here today and speak because there are others questioning my intentions, others questioning the fact that I just want to help. I'm 23 years old, and I am mentoring 180 kids in over 41 different schools, and I am not a PRP program. I am a nonprofit organization. I am spending my time, my money, my effort, my energy to help these kids because I want to. And I am the one getting calls because kids are getting robbed on their schools, at their school, because they are getting banked at their school and having those children follow them home because they got robbed 2 days ago at Reach Partnership on school campus because they had kids that wanted to fight not only them, but their parents as well. When their parents came up there to protect them, like the parent tried to do in the situation at that particular school. I have over 300 letters here from kids in over 41 different schools that was sent to everybody on Baltimore City Council and the people in Baltimore City schools, explaining how they fear for their lives as they walk to school, as they're in school, as they walk home from school. And every day, I get sent videos. I have kids call me because they are scared, and I don't know what to do. I am only 23 years old, and I am taking the pain of so many different kids. And then I'm called an opportunist. I'm not an opportunist. I don't want nobody's money. I'm not here trying to get a grant. I'm not here trying to get attention. I wish I didn't have to be here. I don't want to be here. I'd much rather be home playing my video game or something. But I have to come and protect my kids because it seems like there are those that are claiming to be doing that until I get hundreds of letters, hundreds, and not a response back when they're sent. I love Baltimore City schools. It's needed. All our kids need an education, and unfortunately, they're not getting the best education, but they need the education. But we can't expect to send them somewhere. We can't expect to make them go, otherwise be held truant. And then they don't feel like they're safe. I'm not coming here to offer stern rebuke. I'm not coming here to try to make anyone look bad. That is not my intentions. Sincerely, that is not my intentions. But I am dealing with kids in every school, not just one. And in every school, they are scared. They're often talked about as if they are the perpetrators of crime all the time. But when are we finally going to realize that they are also the victims? We have to do better for them. If for nothing else, just to give me a break, but we have to do better for them. I'm begging of you. So I don't know how many more tears I have to shed, and I don't know how many eloquent words I have to give. Please.
Thank you, Mr. Brooks. Also, we have Councilman Conway from the 2nd District also. Kevin, 4th, I'm sorry. Kevin Marks.
Hello, everybody. I was trying to figure out what I wanted to say because also I'm part of Level Up and I know the kids there and everything else. But I want to give you a parent's point of view because my kids go to Baltimore City Schools. My 12-year-old and my 6-year-old are getting an education where my 6-year-old is learning French. My 12-year-old is fluent in French. And Sunday he will be at the Chinese consulate doing the production, giving a speech from the education he got here. My 16-year-old is a football player, just had his junior year, and decided he wanted to be the lead in the school play, and did that. Never acted before in his life. Did that with the confidence he got here. And one day I got a phone call at 8 o'clock because he almost got robbed trying to walk to school. And the school is only 3 blocks from our house. That's my city. These kids I'm with every day. I'm their sports liaison. I put them in sports activities. I make sure that they have something to do other than just being in the street. And I do this for every kid that we come across. I find out what you like, and I make it happen. That's what we do. We had kids that wanted to act. We called Disney. We found out a Netflix thing. We find out what they like. We want them to know that opportunities here, they can get no matter what. And I still got to worry about phone calls for kids trying to do right and might not make it home. That's what bothers me. That's why we're here. We're not saying nobody's not doing their job. We're asking for more to be done. We just want them to be safe, be kids. All I can tell you is we're going to keep fighting. And we want to work with you, and we're asking for your help. Just open doors, help us out. Let us know what you want us to do. Trust me, you give us an opportunity, we'll make it happen because they deserve it. They need it. Thank you.
Thank you. Also, I'd like to recognize Councilman Glover from the 13th District. We're going to go to call-ins. Is anybody on a call-in that could use the raise hand function, please? There's no call-in, so we're going to start the questions from the council. I believe Chief Pam Chung, you want to introduce your staff that's here also? Or you can sit there and hit the button. To the right.
Hi, my name is Pam Chung. I'm the division chief for the Juvenile Division of the State's Attorney's Office, Baltimore City.
You want to introduce yourself also?
Hello, my name is Catherine Rosenblatt. I'm the Deputy Division Chief for the Juvenile Division in Baltimore City.
Thank you. So we are going to, our colleagues, we're going to do 2 questions. 2 questions, not the story before the questions, but just questions. And my first 2 is, what is the process for determining the best placement for assigning transitioning students to a school setting? Dr. Sanders, whoever can answer that.
Good afternoon. I'm Roger Shaw, work with Baltimore City Public Schools, the director of the Re-Engagement Center. Councilman Stokes, your question, and I'm going to answer that question. There's a lot that goes into that. And the conversation with the young man or young woman who's coming into the re-engagement center to be re-engaged and to be assigned to a school is layered with what happened to you. It's layered with trying to break down the emotional incarceration of young people. So once we do all of that, and then we go into what do you want to do in life? What's your passion? And then after we do that, we begin to look at the academic piece. What do you need to graduate? Where can we send you to help you pursue your why? All of that goes into that process. And then we get into where do you feel safe? Are there any conflicts to the school we're going to assign you to? Are there anything in the community that we need to know about? We call that a safety assessment. And then we engage the family, mom, dad, grandmother. Is there anything else we need to know? And then after that, we talk about the school that can best meet the social needs and the academic needs of the student. And then once we do that, there's a phone call to that school, to the principal, to set up an orientation for that student, or to set up a discussion to make sure this is the right fit. All of that goes into assigning a student to a particular school.
My second question, what school system resources are provided to the receiving school and its leadership to support those students?
So the first thing we do is we have social workers that go out to the schools, because these students are on their caseload, to meet with the administration, to meet with the social worker of that school, to make sure the barriers that were identified in the re-engagement center that we can help the school deal with and provide solutions for them. So there's follow-up from the re-engagement center to the school. Second, some of the students, depending on the need and the severity of what has happened to them or what they've been going through, then they also, some receive a mentor. And then thirdly, what we do is we make sure that if the school contacts us and says, listen, things aren't working well, the student hasn't been coming, there's been a conflict, we then send the student back to the re-engagement center to talk about what else or what other supports that they need. So there's a lot that goes there. So it's really the dialogue and the collaboration with the school and the family to provide follow-up supports.
Thank you. Councilman Cohen?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Dr. Santelises, and the entire City Schools team, BPD, State's Attorney, DJS. Thank you all for being here. One of the things that I don't think I saw in your presentation, Dr. Santelises, that I think is pretty pervasive with our young people is social media and the not always good role that it has in shaping mental health, in exacerbating bullying, and in leading conflicts to the point of escalation that often, in some cases, involves violence and guns. I'm curious, this has come up in a few conversations we've had on the Trauma-Informed Care Task Force, just thinking about how to combat some of the negativity that is being poured into our children through social media, through TikTok, through Instagram. Is cities, like, are we doing anything as city schools to try to address this epidemic and try to intervene and counter-program some of the messages that our kids receive?
So, and I was sitting there nodding, Councilman Cohen, because it's a great question, and I think it is one that we have only, you know, to be straightforward, I think we've only started touching around the edges, right? So yes, as part of advisory, yes, as part of health, those kinds of things, but what I heard in your question, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, is there a really strategic way that we are, you know, laying out to counter the negative influences that daily, weekly come out about the negative impact on social media? And I think, you know, as we heard earlier in testimony, only exploded during virtual learning during COVID. And so I think the short answer is, yes, we're doing it in pockets, but no, I don't think we have that kind of strategic, you know, full force, you know, how are we really going to counter that? Yes, have we looked at, and there are schools that, you know, are looking into where do you limit cell phone use. I will say in Baltimore City, we have critical masses of families who want ready access, right, to their young people, many times for really good reasons. But I do think that's a way of saying that's a place where I think we could partner with you and others around the social media, because we actually do need a comprehensive approach. I think as it pertains to kind of the circulating of violence in some of the more, I would say, the most destructive ways that we all have examples of, where we can, we try to advocate for the removal of those kinds of things on social media. But no, I think we, you know, again, we have it somewhat, but not to the level that you're describing. And I think it's definitely an area that we could do some deeper work in.
Yeah, I mean, you know, one of the sad things is that the way these companies have built these platforms is that the incentives are to be cruel and outrageous and angry, and the more of that, the more clicks and retweets and all the rest. And so it feels like a space that we don't, as adults, and I worry about this with my own kids soon, have much visibility on, because I don't get the same feed that teenagers in Baltimore get. And I just think we should do some strategic thinking around whether it's peer influencers and trying to enlist young people, just trying to think about how do you get young folks to, and it's really hard because I have a hard time putting down, you know, my own social media and not paying attention and not getting sucked into it. And I'm a relatively healthy adult, so I can only imagine when your brain is developing and you're vulnerable, and just the level of bullying and how it magnifies harm that our kids are experiencing. Last question I had, last thing I want to say, I do want to give a shout out to Director Goodwin, who to me has been a real breath of fresh air, and have really appreciated just some of the partnership that we've been able to have. And in some of our schools, I think we are doing restorative practices, conflict resolution, mediation really, really well. And as you and I have discussed in the past, I think it's a mixed bag. And so from a district perspective, I am curious again about how are we effectively scaling that work? How are we leaning on our best in practice principals that are really doing well? Because I do think coming out of the pandemic, this piece around how do we teach our young people to navigate and mediate conflict, whatever we call it, whether it's restorative circles and justice, whatever it is, that has to be part of the work. So just curious how as a district we're thinking about it right now.
Yes, and I thank you with her sitting here for Director Goodwin. It is one of the things that we've talked about, and I know, Councilman, you have rightly surfaced the issue of consistent implementation, right, which is what you're describing, that yes, in one school it can be an incredibly robust process within a very positive school culture, and in others, it might just be at the level of surface implementation. One of the things that I think Director Goodwin has been doing is really kind of assessing where are we in the plans for the training and the development. She's been quite vocal about needing additional staff support for that, so she will probably thank you after this, given that it's budget season for that advocacy. But we have talked about what really does the system capacity need to be at the level to address just where the variability is. And you have long, which is why I want to acknowledge it, you've long flagged that this is an issue, and it is the challenge of going to scale. I will say Katia Stokes, who I saw in my back, there you are, has also been doing work in this area. But I do think one of the places where we are is actually doing that level of assessment, benchmarking, I don't know whether it's red, green, blue, or some other category, but really getting down to what that training looks like. And that's one of the things that I know Director Goodwin and her team have been talking about with also the schools office, because one of the challenges is which schools do you go to first, but we knew that an area we needed was building far more capacity to reach more schools. It's one thing to start as pilots, it's one thing to give initial training, but the actual on-the-ground coaching was something that we were hearing from schools who were not as advanced in the implementation that they needed. It's one thing to go to a training, it's another thing to have, if I'm a classroom teacher, someone in my class saying, okay, that was an opportunity for you to be able to do something different or to facilitate in a different way. So here, and I will say that I do think, Executive Director Goodwin's only been in the role since July, so this is around that time of year where those plans will be coming forth, particularly as we have budget discussions.
No, I appreciate it, and just to say that I think, when we talk about, particularly around families and parents and that sort of idea of parent accountability. Yeah. I really agree with one of the previous speakers who said, we got to pour into our parents as well and into our families, and that you can only be accountable if you are well yourself enough to be accountable. And so I think it is both the accountability and the support. And I think at the schools where I've seen restorative practices done well, it is a whole family and a whole school approach, and one that is sorely needed coming out of the pandemic and mental health crisis. Thank you.
No, duly noted. Thank you.
Thank you. Real quick, I just want to mention we talking about this, but we need to include poverty, because I've never went to sleep and was hungry and had to wake up hungry. So sometimes kids behave the way they behave, because we sitting here, we probably fortunate we can go where we want to eat. You got kids don't eat during the day, their meal is at the school, or they go to sleep hungry, they wake up hungry. So let's not miss the poverty piece that's so important, that need to be injected into sometimes why young people have that type of behavior that they have. So I just want to share that. Councilman Torrance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, but I'm going to give a soliloquy first. Thank you, Dr. S. I hear the voices of the community, but I'm going to say this. There are system failures at city schools. There are system failures in the city government. And colleagues, I'm going to preface all three rounds of my questions. The first will be related to school police and their concurrent jurisdictions and the failures at city schools police department. The next questions will be about carrying adults as accountability for our principals and leadership and executive leadership at city schools. I just want to make sure the public knows that this is an accountability conversation. And I look forward to my chair of the Public Safety Committee and the chair of the Education Committee as we set an expectation by July 1 that we have policy changes, system changes at city schools to move forward on behalf of the mission for our Black children and all of our children in city schools. My first question is really this, and this is a commitment I've had conversations with the administration about. We must review the concurrent jurisdiction of Baltimore City Schools Police. Officers can no longer tell us that they cannot patrol a park. Officers can no longer tell us they cannot patrol a parking lot. That is a failure. You went to Baltimore, you went to the Maryland State Police Training Authority. You have police powers throughout the entire city of Baltimore. And I just want to make sure that the officers understand. I understand that you want to go home to your family. I understand you are short-staffed. We ask of this of BPD every day. However, today, I want a commitment from city schools that I have gotten a commitment from Baltimore City Police to train a trainer. Your officers can no longer say that they don't know how to issue a warrant. Let me be clear. Warrants are important as families are facing people who are threatening their lives. That is the first step to make sure that our state's attorney's office can actually bring someone to court. That was a failure at one of our schools. So at this point, my first question is City Schools committed to reviewing the concurrent jurisdiction with the Baltimore City Police Department?
Good afternoon. Yes, that's no problem. We can write warrants, so I think we should have a conversation, perhaps at a later date, so we can talk to it another time.
We will have that conversation, but I want to make sure that the public knows that that conversation is going to occur, but it's going to occur in public, where we will review those systems that failed.
Sure.
Because I won't put the details out there because the family was in harm's way because of the inaction of an officer.
Gotcha. Okay.
Right? The state's attorney's office had to step in. I'm going lighthearted because that is trauma that I don't want to share in the public sphere. But I think that is the first step. With that being said, has City Schools consulted Baltimore City Police Department, its commissioner, and its leadership on the search for your next police chief?
That is part of the process, and it is ongoing. When we are soliciting recommendations, the process itself includes that level of consultation. So because we're in the middle of the process, I would say that's ongoing. It's not we actually just launched the search. So it is designed to be part of it. We're not at the end of the search. We're not in the middle of the search. We're beginning the actual information gathering, and we've secured the firm. So yes, we will integrate that because we're at the beginning of the process.
So, on my understanding, given to the public laws of the state of Maryland as well as the city of Baltimore, that police chief will report directly to the chief of patrol for Baltimore City Police Department. I think that conversation should happen next week, and I think that should be a committee request that City Schools does consult early on with the chief of patrol as well as the operations chief, because that person will report to them. To give the public an understanding of how it works with police departments in the city of Baltimore, they all report to the police chief, which happens to be the commissioner of Baltimore City. That force, as well as their officers, can be commanded at any time to serve alongside Baltimore City police officers. That is why I'm asking for not only train a trainer to help our officers at City Schools have that training, that continuity, so our state's attorney's office has that same continuity, but also that this person and the expectations of that role is clear, because we've had no clarity since the initial MOU several years ago. And I thank you for your commitment.
Councilman.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good to see you, Madam CEO. I'm really curious. I appreciate the testimony here tonight, and it really makes me begin to think. I apologize, I wasn't here to see your presentation, so maybe you already have all the answers, or maybe have answered these questions already. Do we track data and incidents independent from Baltimore City's crime metrics? I ask that question because one of the things I struggle to wrap my head around is just kind of the nature of incidents in schools and around schools, after school. We're talking about students. Sometimes these issues arise during school, sometimes they pick up after school, on the way to or from home. Do we track any of that stuff in that way? Do we pull that out of BPD's metrics so that we know that these issues can or cannot be resolved in schools or with the help of schools?
I'll start, and then I'll turn it over to Major Coleman. I think some of it depends on the incident you're referencing, right? So the Maryland State Department of Education, like most state educational oversight bodies, have their own required data that needs to be collected and submitted. There is crossover between some of that data and actual criminal arrestable activity. But as a school system, one of the data points I shared was on bullying, right? So we track that data. Bullying is one of the areas where we have large numbers of families weighing in clearly. But that bullying data wouldn't necessarily be part of a review of city police data. The same with suspensions, the same with other kinds of acts. But Major Coleman can discuss the kind of data that would actually crosswalk with some of that city police data.
We track, good afternoon. We track the incidents that occur on school property. Some of the incidents that may occur to a student on their way home, we may not know about. That report may go to Baltimore City Police Department if they live on the other side of town. So that would be in their data. However, we do utilize the same reporting system. And if we're made aware of that, we can pull that data and we can, or reach out to the Deputy Commissioner and we can get that data.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because that's part of my next question on how we share and integrate data between various agencies. Sort of, you know, one of the things I've been thinking a lot about, we of course we've been having issues with violence amongst young people. We've seen spikes, and we talk about it a lot in the Public Safety Committee. And I really see schools as a resource here. I mean, you guys can be phenomenal partners in figuring out how to crack that nut to, one, identify what's going on with our young people. You're the most likely to see them. Even if they don't show up to school every day, they're going to see you more than they see, you know, said officer on their street. So, you know, you're going to be one of the most important touches for that young person that maybe is going through something or maybe causing trouble in some way, shape, or form. And so my sort of question is, how do we integrate that data, both with BPD, what you can or cannot share with BPD, I'm sure is sensitive, but then BPD, of course, sharing everything they have with you within, I guess, some limitations if there's, you know, big investigations. How do we make sure that that information is shared, state's attorney, and I would say anybody on this list, juvenile services, state's attorney, BPD, we should all be, there should be, I feel like, a weekly report on what we're seeing in each respective sort of school area with young people. And I think that would help a lot in helping us figure out what next step should happen for young people. Do we do anything like that? Is that something that we can consider?
I can tell you that each one of the officers, each one of the sectors within the school police department participate in the criminal intel meetings in the districts. There are 9 districts, and we actually have 7 sectors. So some of my sectors cross, and they'll go to each district's intel meeting to share information. We get information about what's happening in some of the communities, just like they find out information what's happening in the schools. We do this within every 2 weeks.
Okay.
So, yes, there are school police officers that are attending our intel meetings in the district. I will also say that there is a school police officer who is staffed in BPD's Watch Center, who's watching the cameras or seeing the CAD as incidents come through. There is also a school police officer that is at, is part of our warrant apprehension task force in reference to specifically serving those juvenile-related warrants. As recently as probably a week ago, I spoke to Major Coleman in reference to trying to better utilize the school police officer that is in WATF, and we're working out a plan for that. So we are having that robust conversation as often as possible. We were a part of a conversation in reference to, as the gentleman mentioned, that social media video that was out there. Our intel part is working with school police in reference to a cease and desist order, in reference to no longer allowing the victim to be victimized by that video. But of course, because that is a private sector company, just because we want them to doesn't mean it. We have to go through a judicial format to send them a specific request, and it's somewhere in their system to be reviewed. So we're actively working with that. I will also say, as far as real-time information, the school police does send out a text alert when there are incidents that are occurring on school property that we are part of when it comes out. So yes, sir.
Actually, I'll make this a request of the committee. Can you please share the data that you review, the kinds of information that you review in your biweekly meetings? I'd really like to get a sense for how we look at these problems right now, how we measure our success, how we evaluate how we're doing. I've been bullied before, and BPD shouldn't have been dealing with my bullying. That would be something that would be dealt with in the schools. But then there's also instances where kids don't feel safe walking to and from school, and BPD needs to be involved. So I think there's a continuum in which different people pick up the ball and take it from there. And Mr. Chair, if I'm okay to ask one more question. This leads me to my last question. Once we understand the data, once we understand the trends, once we understand what's going on, I really see an opportunity for us not only to share data within our various agencies, but also to share resources. We should be, and I don't know how we are, I'm sure we are in some way, shape, or form, but we should be coordinating resources. Some people need mental health treatment, some people need discipline, some people need assistance for their parents to, housing. Who knows what it may be. But I guess one of my colleagues, I'm not sure who made this point earlier, but whatever resources the city can provide with whatever city programs we have available to us, we should be leaning in not only to support that young person, but support the people that support that young person. Sometimes you see kids acting out because they need attention, because they're frustrated with what's going on in their household, and it has nothing to do with their colleagues or their classmates. Young people, as you guys know very well, can be pretty complicated in that regard. And I want to be, we only have so much money in here in Baltimore City government, but I do want to make sure that we are finding ways to get the best juice for the squeeze and to get the most out of our resources. And if we're finding that young people are having trouble adjusting, and we have some school program that is intended to address that, but we also have additional programs at the city level that may help their family or other people within their circle or even that young person outside of school, we should be working together in that regard. And so I'll pose this now as a question. How do we do that? How do we coordinate that? Where does that happen? And who, and maybe this is, for the city, like who is that sort of liaison with our school system to make sure that that's happening?
I'm happy to start, and then if you want to talk about the data piece. But so we, Councilman Conway, we have a number of ways we work with the city. So in a school level, we've talked about, we have community schools coordinators who are working in the school community to work with families to figure out what supports they need and to connect with resources. They could be nonprofit resources, they could be resources from the state, from the city, to make sure that we're connecting the resources and supports that families need. We've also made sure that we have social workers in each school so that social workers too can connect. And these are teams that work in our schools to kind of work to make sure that we're identifying the resources that students need. We also have partnerships. We work on, we have a number of things we've been working on with the city recently with regard to violence specifically. So we have safe passage work that we've been doing with the city and the city police and the transit police to look at key points where we know that there's challenges in terms of students getting home from school. And so we work with them to coordinate supports along the safe passage routes. We also, we've worked in the past with, when we have incidents at schools, then we often work with our partners at MONSE or at Mayor's Office of Children and Families to come in to provide supports that are additional to the supports that we can provide. So if there's counseling that needs to happen to the community, so we can provide counseling to students, and we often bring in our crisis team to support students and our EAP to support staff, but going to counseling beyond that to the community is something that we are not as good at, so we bring in support there. We also then will partner on, there are services that the city can provide. So we've worked with MONSE before. If a family needs to be relocated, if there's a family's in danger, then we'll reach out to MONSE to connect them. We talk to the family first. We get their permission to make sure they're okay sharing with their information, because we have had families say no, that they don't want their information shared. But so we want to make sure that we're doing that with the consent of the family that they want the support. But we will ask them if they want that support, and if they want the support, then we will either have an agency call them directly, or sometimes they prefer to get the information of the agency and call the agency. But because they couldn't provide, like we've had in real time, Monzi has moved families on the same day that where there's a threat to a family, and we've had them move the family. We've connected for other services, wraparound supports like funeral services in those cases. So those are some of the ways that we work with partners. We are also, the Mayor's Office of Children and Families is setting up, we work them to set up a case management group that will also work on supports for young people whose lives are in danger. So this is with BPD and DJS. We work with them to try to set up a group where there's a student who's at risk, who's maybe been shot before, been a person of interest in a shooting, maybe a sibling of somebody who's been shot before, that we are still convening some of the, we're still working on the final agreements to have those meetings start. But the idea is that then you would meet on when there's a student who's in danger, that team. And it's a team that used to be, that was in place many years ago. So I've talked to the mayor, the current mayor about it when he was council person, Cheryl Goldstein when she was the head of the Mayor's Office of Criminal Justice, and Chief Ham when he was the police chief, all talk about that work as being some of the most impactful work in terms of saving student lives. And so it kind of tapered off, I think, in like around 2011 or 12 or so. And so we've been working with Mayor's Office of Children and Families to kind of reconvene that work. And so it should be starting soon, and that's real-time work to identify a student who needs kind of safety solutions that we can identify. So those are some examples. You can talk more than I can, Interim Chief Coleman, about this data sharing. Kinds of data. You want to know the kinds of data.
There's certain kind of data that we can share with other jurisdictions. So we collaborate a lot, especially with Baltimore City Police, even with MTA Police, on different things and how to address certain crimes that are impacting certain parts of the city. And so, but again, there are certain data items that I can share about the students and certain things that I can't, but we all collaborate in how we assist in investigations of different incidents across the city.
Yeah, that's really helpful to know that we have those relationships and that we're leveraging them. I wonder if there are ways to make them smoother, and if they're, certainly for schools, this is what you do. You're dealing with kids who are dealing with problems all the time, and so you're going to be coming up to the city with, requesting resources all the time. Cities dealing with it too. Often, on the other end, we're seeing, kids out in the public when they should be at school. How are we dealing with truancy? And how do we coordinate with the schools so that we can make sure that those issues are addressed? So I appreciate we're doing a lot of that coordination now. I wonder if there are ways to improve that, and even more to make sure that we're tying it towards helping us accomplish the outcomes and metrics that we want to see over time. It's really hard for me to hear some of the stories that some of the folks talked about earlier, and nobody wants to hear that. What I don't know is, in the grand scheme of how often is this happening, is it getting better or worse? I just don't know when you hear anecdotal, explanation. And if it is getting worse, why is it getting worse? And so, I would love to see that data once you're able to share it, and think long and hard about how we measure our success in partnership and coordination with the various other agencies here. Because I think there is, of course, more opportunities to streamline some of those resources going forward. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Councilman Torrance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Mr. Green. I'm going to clarify for the legislative record the request from myself. The first request is by July 1st. I would like a review of the MOU between BPD and Baltimore City the school police and the regular police by July 1 by June 1st prior to your budget hearings. The expectation is that the MOU be in place before your budget hearings. I'm just making this clear for BPD that the expectation is that this MOU be in place before your budget hearing. In addition to that, Related to BPD, Aaron, I would like to make sure that you have a consultation with city schools. I would like a record of the meeting as well as minutes and an agenda in which you discuss the roles of the concurrent jurisdiction and what they are looking for in their current next police chief, and reauthorize an understanding of how school police will be operating in terms of their explicit duties as sworn members of the police department, but also the fact, and this is for public consumption, they are trained through the Maryland State Police system, right? Every officer is. They have the same duties as any officer is a Baltimore City police officer. If they see a crime, they must act on it, right? We have an agreement that discusses hot pursuits. We have an agreement that discusses concurrent jurisdiction. I want to make sure that we discuss, and ideally, the concurrent jurisdiction at parks, a certain radius around schools, but also the detail of the conversations that we have in terms of investigations that they cannot handle. Carjacking, those things, we need to make sure that there is a clear delineation in terms of what BPD will pick up and what school police will have in their resources, and discuss the cross-training between BPD and school police. I know school police does well with interacting with young people. Maybe we can learn from their training how to interact with young people outside of our schools, but in terms of just basic field training work that we worked on through our consent decree, I think school police needs to have it. You need to know how to do a warrant. You need to know how to properly do an investigation and have conversation, and any interrogation with a young person. Also, BPD's officers should be trained on how to author Miranda rights for young people. This is a collaborative conversation that needs to occur across agencies, but the expectation will be held on BPD to have this ready by their June budget hearing, as well as city schools to have an update of that MOU and signed and executed by their board prior to their budget hearing as well. Just so that the public is aware that the expectation is by June 1st.
Thank you, Councilman. You know, our Baltimore City Police, our state police, and our city police all trained, right? Why is it that our school police, we talking about, suppose we have an active shooter in one of our schools. How are we going to protect the teacher? How are we going to protect the aide? How are we going to protect the students? When we had a law before that said when city police go into the school, they have to put their weapons up. But kids still bringing loaded guns to school. So how do we protect the people in the school, especially our teachers? They have a tough job. Everybody working in that school system have a tough job. Our gym teachers, they are not safe. And when you hear young people say they want to be safe in the school, I don't know how you do that. That might have been great before, and I'm saying something that nobody else probably would say. Stop handicapping our school police. If they police, let them do their job. They've been trained the same way as Baltimore City Police and state police. How are we protecting our kids and our principal and our students in the school? We're going to wait till we have an active shooter? They are all over the country. Again, we're going to be reactive, because now we have to change what was there before that need to go back to which it should be. You see it every day, 15, 16 guns in schools, and they not toy guns, and they loaded. So how are we going to protect our students? How are we protecting the teachers? They got a tough job already. I talk to teachers, scared to death. Can't say nothing to no kids because they don't know what the outcome going to be. So we can sit here and call police, call them school resources. That's what they are. If they can't take their weapon to the school, that's all they can do is offer some resources. But I've talked to school police. You know what the question is? What happens when you got an active shooter in the school? What you gonna do? You know what the answer was? I'm running with the students. So we can sit here and talk about safety outside, but it ain't safe inside either. So I just wanted to share that, because that's something that's been on my chest for a while, and I wanted to share it, and I know people might not like it. But when we handicapped our police before, a long time ago, school police, now we got to look at it a little different. Kids are bringing loaded guns to school, and you wonder why the parents say, my kid is not safe in school. Because we talk about the outside, what about the inside? Teachers and that school system are dedicated to them kids, but I want them to be safe too. Like parents want their kids to be safe too. So my other question is, we have the sheriff police, school police, Baltimore City police, MTA police. Are we actively talking and sharing information with each other? We can sit here and I can ask you and you can say, yeah, how do the public know that? How do they know that? So if a kid get hurt or a kid get robbed or shot outside of the school system, it's not now the school system responsibility. It's either the Baltimore Police or MTA. So there's a lot of layers there. So how are we now making sure that those sheriff, school, Baltimore City Police, and MTA Police, that the public know y'all sharing information? Because outside of the school, outside they leaving the grounds, kids still getting robbed, kids still getting shot. So my question is, how do those 4 entities make sure that they share with the residents of Baltimore that they actually are talking to each other? I can sit up here and ask the police department, school police, and everybody, and y'all say yeah, but how do the people in Baltimore City know that's actually happening? So my question is, will you actively make sure when you're meeting that you make sure that the residents of Baltimore City know what you're talking about and how you're actually working together? Commissioner Jones, and can you?
Thank you, sir. So that's a great question. So I will say for BPD, you know, we do have an Intel section, which is a working group, which is at, you know, intel@bpd.com, where .org, that not only school police, but MTA and the sheriffs are also a part of that and can pour into that Intel portal. That portal, of course, will not be open to the public because it's sensitive information. And sometimes it is unverified information that has to be vetted. I will say, you know, when school police attends our Intel meetings, that is where the information is shared in reference to juvenile activity that may or may not have a correlation with that school. That's also a vetting process that it could be a one-off. It could be 2 individuals at a bus stop and somebody's mad at somebody, has nothing to do with a school, or it could be something that started in the school, spilled out into the street, started in the street and spilled out into the school. So that's a conversation that not only the district commanders, when they have their Intel meeting, the representatives from school police should be there in reference to vetting that information, in reference to what is the next best step in reference to avoiding the conflict. I will say, in reference to BPD's part in partnership with school police, you know, we're active with our NCOs, which are our neighborhood coordinating officers. We're active in ensuring that through the PC's directive and our consent decree mandate that every officer should be an ambassador for community policing and engaging with our young and youth. I will say as of last year, just before the holidays, we had a meeting with Dr. Brooks in reference to safe passage. And we got with school police and they identified several areas where they wanted more BPD presence in reference to ingress and egress from the schools. And we're very supportive in trying to help those in those areas when we can. So I say that it is an active approach. I will, excuse me, and not to put Acting Chief Coleman on point, because they may be doing it already. But a way of showing, I believe, which is an easy lift for probably both of us, our entities, is that each district commander has a monthly community meeting. It's a hybrid. It's in the district as well as virtual. That is probably an easy lift of having a representative from the school police on that or in that meeting, so they can answer questions and they can show the community that they are aware of their concerns and are actively a part of it. I think that's an easy lift that we all can do.
Deputy Commissioner, I understand that, but I'm not talking about giving out the information that they can't give out. I'm talking about how do you let the community know some kind of way you're meeting and what kind of information can you put out there? I mean, what you're saying is inside kind of stuff to me. I'm not talking about releasing juvenile. I'm talking about how the community know we got a safety problem in the city, in schools, out schools, and all those 4 jurisdictions. How do you get that out to the community, say we are meeting and here's the information that we are sharing? And some stuff you can't share. No. But what you're saying is not getting out to the community who need to know that. No, because what the majors do at Eastern District, I go to them. I don't always see school police there, and nothing against them. I don't always see the sheriff office there. So if it's going to happen, then their presence need to be there at those meetings also. Not to say, you know, we all talk in our own little room, or we share information. All I'm saying is, how do that information get down to the community to show that these 4 law enforcement in the city are talking about crime in the city, not just in the schools, outside the schools, in neighborhoods?
No, I think that is with the community meetings that they have. So each district commander every month has the meeting that you attend, asking that school police, asking that our other partners attend those meetings. So, you know, the district commander will allot them 5-10 minutes to go over any concerns that they have about schools that are in that district. I think that's the best way to show not only that the school police are aware of some of these incidents, but make the community aware that, look, not only do we know about it, but this is what we're doing about it. So I think that's the best avenue that the community can not only get this intel and information, but also then give the Q&A later in reference to whatever their specific concerns may be.
But this is not to beat up none of the law enforcement. But when I go to the meetings, everybody I'm talking about ain't at the meetings. Everybody is not at the commander's meeting. Not always the sheriff office.
No, that's what I'm saying.
Not
I think it's a soft ask to. That's why I said I don't want to put acting chief Coleman on the spot. But I'm saying he should show up to the right.
Even though it's a soft ask, that should be required. And when I go to those meetings, everybody's not there. So that should be a requirement that all those law enforcement agents should be there also. Because the community now see the presence and they understand it. But that's the only way they can see you working together. You can't have a meeting and come in and say, we meeting together. How do the community know that unless you say it? But I think the physical part of them seeing it is what's important, that know y'all actually sharing information and addressing crime in the city. That's what my request.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Chair. So from the administration perspective, just to kind of walk back, the administration is exploring legislation in Annapolis to amend the youth data sharing expansion, right? And so essentially we're seeking amendments to the existing youth data hub legislation to authorize the receipt of identifiable information by the health department, BCPS, school police, DJS, DSS, and the mayor's office, and local law enforcement to improve their effectiveness in safeguarding our children. So that's the first step. So we are looking at legislation at the state level. In addition to that, the mayor established Youth Stat, which is Youth Violence Stat, which is where all of those partners are present in the room to discuss violence specifically for our young people. I think that when we start having conversations about how information is disseminated to the community from those meetings, we can have those conversations offline, and would welcome your input into how we can do a better job at making sure that the vital information trickles out of those meetings and gets to the communities that would benefit greatly from having that information as well.
I think, and also I'd like to see the state's attorney's office and to be involved also. I think that's important. I think you already do it. So my next question is how the students proactively tracked by DGS in the school system, and I need the DGS to answer the question also.
I'm sorry, can you repeat your question?
How are the students proactively tracked by both DGS and the school system?
Okay, thank you. So in terms of kids who are under supervision to the Department of Juvenile Services, we do have, they are assigned if they are under active court order, or if they're under pre-court supervision, we have workers who are assigned temporarily for at least 90 days in the case of the latter, and for the duration of their court-ordered probation or aftercare. We track not only their attendance in school, but also we're working to have them engaged in school or re-engaged in school. The benefit of when kids are in the detention system right now, we now have dual enrollment where they do not get off-boarded in terms of they're not taken off the rolls in Baltimore City schools when they're in the detention status, where that is when they are awaiting what people understand as a trial. When the kids are committed to us and coming back to community from placement, we actually do have a very coordinated effort with Baltimore schools, as well as our offices to ensure that we are providing an educational program, that we are monitoring their attendance, and also holding them accountable for lack of attendance. We understand DJS is concerned about the safety in schools, but also concerned about kids being engaged in school and completing their educational goals, because an unproductive mind is, like I said, my grandmother said, an idle mind is the devil's playground. And so making sure that the kids who are under supervision to us are actively engaged in school, that we are addressing any barriers to them being engaged in school, as well as holding them accountable for the lack of compliance and attendance in school is a priority for us, because that is primarily them not being able to meet a critical condition of their supervision with us.
Thank you. Did the school system want to comment on that?
The way we're tracking and the re-engagement with city schools is once they're released from placement or detention, we get an email saying this student is coming back to the community. We then identify or notify, I should say, the parent to come into the re-engagement center with the young person, and then we begin the re-engagement process. So every time a young person is released from placement or from one of the facilities, our team is notified, and then we start the communication with the family and get that student into the re-engagement center.
Thank you. Councilman Glover?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So my question is, so I've talked to many educators in Baltimore City Public Schools. I've talked to some principals, some teachers, even some of the school police, and some of the supporting staff. Some are telling me that they don't have plans on coming back next year. They're leaving to go elsewhere. My ask is, what are we going to do to replace those that have said they will leave? And many of them probably just talking office talk, but some of them are saying they're really leaving to go either back home, wherever they're from, or to the point where they just don't want to deal with Baltimore City Public Schools anymore. A lot of them feel like they're not getting the support that they need in order for them to be successful, in order for that child to be successful. So what are we doing to ensure that we are keeping those educators, our police, our support staff still here in the city?
No, thank you for your question. And I will say that the education field as a whole, like, so when I do my monthly meetings with the other 24 superintendents across the state of Maryland, many of them are having far greater, frankly, departure of staff. So some of it is endemic to just the pressures on the education profession right now. The work of teachers is 10 times harder than it was 4 years ago. So we're doing a variety of things. So one, I think part of the work has been to really, try to be responsive to the need for wellness time for all student staff. So you'll see within our calendar, we've actually added 2 to 3 days throughout the course of the year that are wellness days, just for people to be able to breathe and step back in ways that might not have been as apparent, probably was always necessary, but not as apparent before the last couple of years. I'd say the second thing that we are doing is we're getting we're getting more training together, more development together for our in-city, Baltimore City paraprofessionals and other folks who, frankly, are based here, who live here, many of whom grew up here, and frankly, the strong cords to the city and the system are a little bit different than it might be for some staff. And then, very straightforwardly, we have some work we're doing on reducing just the paperwork administrative piece that is often weighing on both school leaders. I have had conversations with both the, PISAZA, the administrative union, as well as focus groups of teachers. BTU has brought it forth. We know it has been an issue just in the current climate, in the, some of the stressful conditions right, of our city right now, our young people, our families, are just making things like exorbitant paperwork even more burdensome. And so again, building in time for that, and then from a central perspective, being able to say, frankly, just what is not necessary. We're also looking into very specific additional support for teachers of special educators. So there's on that end, which is the retention end. Also, Dr. Place-Tosé is here, who's in our schools department, and one of the things that we're finding is there is variability. This has always been the case, but it's more stark now. There's variability of retention based on the overall climate of the school, number one, and number two, the skillfulness of that school leader to actually support staff. So some of the question is, how do we develop that skill base at the same time that we are ramping up different ways of recruiting? So we're recruiting more international teachers from different places. The paraprofessional program I talked about getting people who are certified. Our principal pipeline is actually coming through our equity office, so how we are actually recruiting school leaders and developing them differently. So it really is a combination of more creative approaches to recruitment, and I would say even more importantly, retention. How do we make these jobs more doable, given all of the stress that a lot of frontline educators have been experiencing the last 3 to 4 years? Does that answer your question?
That's cool, but going off of everything you just said, are you saying that we should be fully staffed like next year? I know you're saying that you're bringing individuals in, you're recruiting,
I am
going
really
all over the country
hoping,
to bring the best. Do you know? If we
yeah,
wanna...
I am really hoping we are. I will tell you, part of what made the problem worse this year, exacerbated the problem, was a good thing, right? So the additional Kerwin dollars were landing in schools, so schools could create positions that they couldn't afford previously, right? So like a literacy coach, that's a great thing for an elementary school trying to get young people further in their reading. The challenge with that is often when that coaching position opened up, a principal might have lost their 4th grade teacher, their 3rd grade teacher. So we actually had more positions. Last year, had we not had additional positions created, we actually would have been fully staffed. So that's my precursor to say we hired more teachers than we ever have in my entire 15 years in the city, and most of those working for city schools. We hired more teachers this year than we had in any year previously. So my hope is that we are going to increase that. We've started earlier, and we are targeting those schools who had chronic openings. Those are the schools that we're really getting on earlier, and some schools we are actually hiring now, even though it's January, for this coming school year. So my target is that we will be fully staffed. That's what we're going for, and I hope we make the target. But it's challenging in this environment.
Okay. So my other question, Mr. Chair, if you don't mind, what are we doing to ensure that the principals and the educators, when we have troubled youth, troubled kids coming from one school, transferring over to another school, what are we doing to give them the support that they need? Because we know that the storm is coming. Make no mistake about it, it's coming. But what are we doing to prepare for that storm? What are we doing to prepare all the services that we're going to provide for that young person that's going to the other school? I know there was an incident at one of the schools in East Baltimore where it was said that this kid was armed and the police was dispatched to that particular school. And what happened was that the principal asked the social worker who had a relationship with the child to get that kid to come down to the office. Once the social worker had that kid come down to the office, the police then came into the room. And the kid turned on the social worker because the kid felt like the social worker had betrayed their trust. Yeah. And social worker was called Bees, social was called all kind of names in the book, but not just that, the social worker vehicle was also vandalized after that. So again, what are we doing to make sure that the principals, the educators, social workers, the support staff are safe and the resources that we're going to provide for the storm that's about to come?
So what I will say is I feel like we already are in, I guess, those early wins of that storm because of some of the incidents you've just described. One of the things that these incidents have forced us to do, and I think it's a silver lining in some of the challenges, is to coordinate proactively what some of those response and services are. I think the other piece is some of the training, right? So what within that process actually was best practice and what might have been a little, might have been possibly addressed differently. And so the training of staff. The other piece is we are at a very basic level still actively hiring. I mean, Major Coleman knows that one of the priorities is building back the depleted school police force. If we could, I think every principal in the city would want an active safety professional at their school, kind of ready to deal with those kinds of incidences that might turn left. We just don't have that staffing, but we do have staffing targets. It's one of the reasons we increased school police pay to help with that recruitment. And the other piece is the continued investment in some of those positions that I referenced earlier to actually help at the school level with those kinds of confrontations, because a lot of it, as you noted, is in the moment, right? Being able to chart the direction and the path that is going to be, help with de-escalation. And I will say a large number of our community partners have really helped with that. We would not have enough trained staff that were solely city schools employees full-time that we would need in a number of our schools to help with things like de-escalation, to help that teacher who's like, look, I just got trained in early reading. I'm not trained, right, in really severe extreme behavior that might be the reaction to stress. And so one of the things that has helped, if you go into more of our schools now, you'll see that those extra dollars, right, the extra Kerwin dollars that people talk about, they're now there for mentors on site. And many of our schools now have those adults, so the teachers are not by themselves in having to deal with that. So we're really trying to build, frankly, the reservoir of knowledgeable, caring adults that can connect with young people and develop people in best practice.
So are the mentors at all the locations, all the schools? And the reason why I'm asking is because, like, I frequent a lot of schools in my district, right? And I talk, again, to a lot of the educators, talk to the principals, and a lot feel like their voice aren't getting heard. I know that those educators, those principals, that administrative staff, they probably know what's going on best than what's going on up in North Avenue than what you guys know. So what I'm asking, do you guys even have an opportunity for your principals, for your educators, I don't care if it's via Zoom anyway, just to get online, to come in person, to talk to the CEO, so they can voice their frustration or voice their opinions, or even those educators or those principals that have shown things have worked in their schools as a pilot program to be able to work in other schools. Do you allow those things to happen with your administration?
No, and it's actually school leaders and teachers are where I get some of my best information, next to actual community members themselves. So I just completed a series of meetings with every group, we call them CLNs. Dr. Place-Jose is the deputy of schools, the schools office. And I schedule regular meetings with those school leaders. When we went out of COVID, we got kind of out of whack, but I made sure that I hear directly from them. So their supervisors are not in the room. No one else is in the room. It is me and them, and I will tell you I do get an earful because there's something to just having safe space. And a lot of that is my best information, to put it very directly. So yes, I commit to do that. I've done that my entire career. I don't rely solely on others to tell me what's going on in schools. And I feel like particularly it's harder for teachers because there's so many of them. But for school leaders, I feel very passionately that they need space where they don't have to go through middlemen. They should be able to get me directly. And frankly, oftentimes in those meetings, I get very valuable information and hear some of what you are saying. I hear some of, it's too much, right? You've got to take something out. I hear very similarly, we don't feel safe. It's one of the reasons we revised the code of conduct, was driven by my meetings with school leaders who told me we feel like our hands are tied by the student conduct code. And it was because of that that we changed that code in the implementation, I should say, of that code, and gave school leaders far more breadth in their ability to suspend students, frankly, for more days, in a way of kind of getting a handle within their budgets, right? Many of them might not, and that's what's interesting about you saying, like, our mentors in all the schools. That's still pretty much the autonomy of the principal within his or her school to choose to do that, or how they partner. We will often suggest. And frankly, the other thing that should be happening is those school supervisors, those ILEDs who I talk to very directly. Their job, frankly, is to know those schools and to be in those schools and to understand what the climate needs are, and to both provide the support that those leaders need, because oftentimes, again, when I'm talking to them, what they're saying to me, many of them, is I need somebody to model what it looks like, right, to have the kind of culture, right, because the culture is built on processes, systems, ways of doing the work. But if a school leader doesn't know what that looks like, somebody going around with a clipboard and a checklist is not going to do that. And so part of what we've worked on is making that shift from just somebody coming in and telling you, this isn't right, to somebody who can actually come in and show you what does it look like to have an entry to the school day where young people, families, feel safe as they enter, and it signals what the culture and climate of the school should be. But I do that, and it's one of the conversations I've been having with Dr. Place-Tosay, Chief Davis, and the school supervisors, because it is an issue. And with teachers, I've had those in the past, and I'll do different cohorts. So I'll do new teachers, and I'll have 25 new teachers come and discuss. Other members of the team our regular liaison with Baltimore Teachers Union as well. So I don't know if that was more than you wanted, but.
No, that was cool, that was a lot. But just to get clarification, you said all of your schools, the principals have full autonomy to hire whom they wish to bring on when it comes to mentoring our young people.
Yeah, so they should have, that is part of their budget. What is most often the challenge is, do they have the money, right, within that budget to partner that way? But that should be part of their budget discussion with their ILED, with their school supervisor. So when they sit down to do budgets, then the principal should be able to say to their ILED, this is a priority for us. This is where I have found the money in the budget. And then that school supervisor, that ILED, should be able to help them carve out what that should look like and support that. If they're not, then principals can always petition either the chief of schools or me for that.
Because also what I witnessed, Dr. Santalisa, is that, you know, even when it comes to the school resource directors and things of that nature that are some contracted out to different organizations, we get phone calls from those organizations asking us, how can we help fund certain things? And it's like, you guys are getting the money through Baltimore City Public Schools. I mean, the city is putting their share up, the state is putting their share up, and yet you guys are still asking us, the council people, how can we contribute to Thanksgiving events, school trips, things of that nature. And our hands are tied to the point where we don't have the money to give. The money was already allocated to those organizations. You know, you got to turn that way.
No, I would agree, and I think that's another area when we talk about collaboration, that is a great opening for collaboration, is how we actually coordinate which organizations are getting funds from which places. Where is that money? Oftentimes, you know, to be frank, sometimes we've got to, you know, push on a school leader and say, wait a minute, you're over here trying to get money over here. You actually have money in your budget for this. And, you know, you've got to look at that. And especially with the Kerwin dollars, that money, the overwhelming majority of it is supposed to go straight to the schools. Now, we still have schools that, frankly, are too small and don't have that budget, but that's a much smaller number. So that, to me, is a place where we should do some coordination, because I agree with you. I find it odd as well when I'm looking at a school's budget and somebody's saying, oh, I don't have anybody who can come work with me. I'm wondering, and that's not all schools, but that is some of them.
Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you. I have two more speakers, but I just have this last question. Does the school system code of conduct give school principals the ability to appropriately address unwanted behavior, and why not?
So I would say, as I just responded, that the code of conduct, and we've worked with our legal counsel, our code of conduct does provide principals with that authority. What we found was the implementation of the code, right, was variable. And we also found that we needed to work, and this is work that began before Executive Director Goodwin you know, assumed the leadership, but previously she was a school supervisor, so she knew that. But we worked to make sure that we, one, had a responsive school suspensions office, right, a school discipline office that wasn't unnecessarily, and we knew it was for good reason, right? Like, we don't want to over-suspend children, but at the same time, we also know what is sometimes with a safe climate, principals need that flexibility. So we worked very hard, both with our Office of Legal Counsel, we worked with Pizzazza, and we worked with our own Office of Discipline and Suspensions to make sure that that flexibility was being felt by school leaders. Because a lot of school leaders told me, you know, I don't submit for it anymore because it's going to get turned down. And so we worked to make sure that was happening. And I actually signaled for some advocates, I'm just telling you now, you're going to see an increase in suspensions, because the increase in violence, the increase in certain behavior means that principals kind of need that flexibility. So no, that was a challenge. We made sure our legal office looked over the code, and we also realized that a lot of it was just the responsiveness and the implementation. And so I have been hearing feedback. You know, I try to talk to Principal Perry, President Perry of Pizzazza fairly frequently, and I try to check in when I have my small sessions with principals to see, do you feel as if you're getting the support you need to enact the necessary discipline to keep the school community safe and to make sure that young people receive, yes, support, but also consequences.
Thank you. I think that's important that the media, the community know that it's being addressed, actually. I have, Councilman, I'll get with you next. I want these two speakers, Chaplain Lovelace and Madeline Mason. Are they here? Come on up. When you come in, you just identify yourself. Thank you.
My name is Madeline Munson-Rosen. I'm a Baltimore City High School teacher at Bard. I'm also the parent of a Baltimore City kindergartner. I'm here to just make some comment also about safety in city schools. Right now, we're hearing a lot about big changes, costly changes, that will supposedly make us safer, things like AI weapons detection in city schools. And I want to tell you that I think that is wrong. The steps to making schools safe and healthy spaces for our children are actually simple and obvious. What we need, speaking as a teacher, are doors with locks, with keys that work. I want Baltimore City to guarantee all teachers in all schools doors with locks that work. None of the school buildings where I have worked in this district have ever had doors that lock. In my last school, I was a floating teacher. I didn't have my own classroom. I shared rooms with 4 teachers. And I didn't have keys to any of those schools, to any of those doors of any of those rooms. So when we had lockdowns, drills, or otherwise, I just put my back against the door and I hope for the best. Now I want to tell you that Sandy Hook Promise says this is the one way to make kids safer in schools. Doors that lock, keys that work. What I want for my room and for my daughter's classroom is a guarantee that she will have a room with a door that locks securely. I also want to talk to you about another issue of safety, and that's access to safe drinking water. Right now, our district does not guarantee students or teachers access to safe drinking water in school. And in the past, although thank goodness not anymore, I worked in buildings where the tap water was undrinkable due to lead contamination, and we had no access to bottled or purified water, sometimes for months. So I'm urging you to tell the school board to guarantee students and teachers access to safe drinking water in our school buildings. And both of these issues are related to a lack of school board accountability. Our school board is not accountable to the people of Baltimore because our school board is almost totally appointed. So finally, while I have you here, I want to ask the City Council to support the BTU's demand, that's the Baltimore Teachers Union's demand, for a fully elected school board. Our children deserve democracy, they deserve accountable leadership, and I want you to make that leadership accountable, making them representative of the people they serve by supporting and fighting for a fully elected board. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate your testimony. Councilman Cole.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, thank you to all the folks who are here, and appreciate you starting after Dr. Santelisa's presentation with hearing from the young people. I thought that set a good tone for this hearing. Curious about school social workers. I know that it is part of the Kerwin funding. I know that I remember there's a partnership that was developing between, I think, Coppin State, Morgan, University of Maryland Schools of Social Work. And I know that it's a shortage, not just in Baltimore, but nationally. So I'm curious where we are in terms of how many school social workers do we have and how many do we need to be at capacity?
I don't know the number that we have. I'd have to get back to you, Councilman Cohen, with the exact number. We did a few years ago in the early concentrations of poverty dollars, one of the first things we did was make sure that every school had at least a social worker. Some have more than that. To your point, it is a difficult area to hire in, so it is, there have been vacancies in that, so we will get back to you with the number. That is an investment that we've thought was really important given, especially coming out of the pandemic, the challenges that we've seen and the need to wrap around our young people with support. some schools have more than one because of their size, and sometimes they choose to invest in having additional social workers to provide that support. I think another important work that the Wholeness Office has done is really tried to align some of those related service providers to work together as a team, because I think that's one thing we routinely heard from principals is that there wasn't. So we had, you had social workers, you maybe a school psychologist, you maybe had occupational therapists, you had the various related service providers in a school who weren't necessarily working together as a team. So we've really tried to put together a way that schools know who those adults are in the building, so they can connect with those adults, and that they're more present to young people so that they can find ways to connect and get the various supports that they need.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I think as we muddle through the mental health crisis portion of the pandemic, having appropriate staff on that side is really important. And, I think to your point, having folks who are also culturally competent and, ideally from our local institutions here, who grew up here, I think the more we can do to address mental health from a culturally competent and really Baltimore-centered lens, I think is really important as we continue to see young people who are clearly hurting and in some cases hurting others. Thank you.
No, I agree, and we also work with community partners to also expand our reach in terms of mental health supports too, because if we often, it's beneficial to have some of the community organizations that work around our schools to help support too.
Appreciate that. And then just curious too, as we are scaling around community schools and increasing support there, what is the same question essentially? Where are we in terms of capacity? And on the continuum, I know there are some that are fully staffed and that have created incredible partnerships with community-based organizations, with businesses, with universities, and on and on and on. It's another program where I think where it is done well, it really works, and it taps into the best of our communities here in Baltimore. And then there are other cases where it is not taken as seriously. So I'm curious where we are as a district in the effort to scale. And again, now that we know there is money, I think from the blueprint, from maintenance of effort funds, from the city, I mean, there should be the resources to scale the program. Where are we in that implementation?
Well, what I was going to say is we are pretty fully staffed or on our way to be with community school coordinators. I mean, some of that, again, is tied to the additional dollars within the Kerwin legislation, the blueprint legislation. I will also say, and this is acknowledging that my now special assistant, Seema Shaw Nelson, was formerly headed up the community school coordinators for Baltimore City Public Schools. And I will say in this instance, unlike in some other areas, we actually do have kind of a robust training plan. So some of that variability about identifying resources does come from actual community school coordinators knowing what that best practice is. I would say that's very robust training. Within community school coordinators, the catching up is, frankly, the large volume of community schools. Now, I believe almost every school district, every school in city schools, somewhat quizzically, qualifies for a community school coordinator. So that's a good thing in that it means all of our schools will have the resource. But it does mean it's going to take some time to ramp up the training. But I will say in the area of community school coordinators, under Chief Hike Hubbard's leadership, we actually do have fairly robust processes and systems in place for training, for onboarding, and just for that sharing of best practices across the city. I think it's the scale at which we have had the money to expand community school coordinators.
No, it's good because, we were, I think, a really early innovator in community schools, and Baltimore was one of the home places where it grew up. And so it's good to hear, I think this is, again, why the Kerwin, the blueprint funding is so critically important, and why the city has to hold the line and continue to do our maintenance of effort and reach, you know, what are challenging, in a challenging fiscal climate, we have to all do our part to make sure these services are available to our kids in our schools. So thank you for that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Before I go to, we have one more speaker. I wonder if they still here. Chaplain Lovelace. Okay. Councilman Torrance.
All right, staff, get ready. Here comes about 10 committee requests and requirements by deadlines, but I want to preface this with a conversation. Again, when I said earlier that there were systems failures in city schools, as well in the police department, but also in the Office of Wholeness in schools office that I want to address. This goes down to management of principals and as well as climate staff 15 minutes before school starts and 15 minutes after. Incidents that happen not only in my district, but Councilman Cohen's district, as well as Councilman Glover's district, happen right outside on the front steps of schools, whether it's substance use, assaults, or other things. This is why I come to that conversation about caring adults. This is called Trust But Verify. So I would like to see all training for the student support wholeness teams in terms of how they're doing cognitive behavioral therapy, their cross-training for principals, assistant principals, and climate teams. The reason why is because we may be doing it at grade at one school, but the leader at another school falls far short of the bell toll of what it is to be a leader at a school district. And I say that because I want to also make sure, and this is a part of your budget conversations as well, before we send anything above maintenance of efforts, I want to make sure the public understands we have to do the standard maintenance of efforts. This council has discussed sending additional funds to city schools. We now know that we can attach a rider to those additional funds to city schools. So before you get any additional funds from the city of Baltimore, I want to do two things. I want to make sure all principals are trained on the policy that we currently have for supervision before and after. I also want to make sure that ILEDs, which are the principal supervisors, as well as the school staff and leadership team with their managers, are checking before and after school for every school, including the charter network. In addition to that, I want to make sure that the board policy committee has it on their agenda for next school year to review the data around it in terms of suspensions, as well as arrests, as well as any crimes committed during those times. I believe that you should revise the board policy around that supervision, and then also that if that supervision is not happening, letters of concern should be issued to principals. This is about accountability, everyone. So I would like to see that publicly publicized on your board documents and your board's agenda for next school year, which will start in the beginning of, I believe, July. That is a Trust But Verify. If we are committed to the work of children, that should be the first thing I should see on your board policy agenda. In addition to that, we must review the suspension policy related to incidents occurring within radiuses of schools. At one time when I was a student at Baltimore City Public Schools, if you committed a suspendable offense within 6 blocks of that school, you were able to be suspended. I think we need to revisit that. In addition to that, my understanding is that we have not held parents accountable for doing assaults in our buildings. So I want to be able to, by July 1, see the data on arrests made for parents who assault our young people in our buildings. I want to also see the data on adults who assault our teachers in our buildings. I get it that we have a requirement to the state which does not disaggregate that data. I want to see that data disaggregate to hold you accountable. In addition to that, I want to see the progress on the doors and locks, as well as the safety improvements to all 170 of your campuses. In addition to that, that is by July 1. By March, I want to update on the middle school alternative program as well as the high school alternative program, where a number of our young people will be entering back from DJS. I also want a status update on Edgar Street Academy for our young people who are currently in corrections. How are we supporting them, and how are we reacclimating them back to society? Everyone good on that one? In addition to that, I want to know how our student support teams have been trained the last couple of years. I don't think it has occurred lately. I think we need to make sure that principals are present for those trainings. I need social workers present for those trainings. I need our school psychologists present for those trainings. In addition to that, I would like to see how far do we get certified school psychologists in our school buildings, because the social workers who are Black and brown women who are upholding our school district are the ones who are doing the work that is the cognitive behavioral therapy every day. But the persons who do not look like our children who are not certified are not present in those buildings enough. In addition to that, I want a status update on the Office of Special Education. As we know, a number of our young people who have been over-identified are also over-policed as well. So we need to know, how are we supporting those young people? I want to know the status of that ED's actual appointment, the status of that team, and I want to know exactly down to how are we doing the corrective action plans that we send to the state of Maryland. All of that by April 1st. And to the public and to the residents who are around Carverville Tech, Connections, ACE, I put it this way. I serve Black and brown people in West Baltimore. Every day, I think about the young people whose lives we've saved because of our gun violence reduction in West Baltimore. What keeps me up at night is young people who are stealing cars and young people who are dying, and the assaults that are happening close to our schools. While we have been lighthearted in terms of the questions, I want to shift to accountability and expectations. I've said this before, the expectation is to do more and do better. This passion you hear is because we may not have direct authority over you, but we can go to our state partners and make sure that you have that accountability. Those conversations have begun. I want to make sure that the men and women in here who are collecting hundreds or plus thousands of dollars in salary understand the classism that some of our actual educators are exhibiting in our classrooms, the teachers, the principals, everyone else. We got to do deeper. You cannot have a racial equity lens in terms of your thing, but in terms of how we act, but we do not implement it properly. So I want to know where we are in terms of that implementation, because I get it. I grew up, I'm a kid from Latrobe Homes who walked to Johns Hopkins to get on a bus to the 16 to get to Carverville Tech in West Baltimore. I've seen the best and worst of the city. I walked from my public housing unit, which was one door over from Carl Stokes where he lived, to my school to get my bachelor's degree, to get my master's degree, and my JD. But what I find is the urgency of the care in the Delta City schools is not always consistent. Let me be clear. There are very much a large sum of care in the Dallas Baltimore City Public Schools. I'm wrapping it up. But there has to be urgency, but there also has to be accountability. And the accountability, whether it is Dr. Santelises or anyone else at city schools, I want to know, how are we evaluating out people who don't care? Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. Councilman Glover?
Yeah, so the last thing I have to add to this is, I know, Dr. Santelises, you mentioned that you've given the principal more authority to suspend. I think suspension is not really the answer to the fact that, are we suspending them to a vacation at home? We're suspending them to the resources that they need. That's where I'm coming with this. I mean, just suspending a kid, having them stay home, to be on YouTube, whatever social media, that's not cutting it. If we're doing suspension, we need to suspend those individuals to organizations that are out there doing the work that are helping our young people. I say, to piggyback off of my colleague, Councilman Torrance, like, I'm a product of Baltimore City Public Schools. I grew up in Chapel Hill Projects, East Baltimore. And back then, at times, I felt like the school system had failed me. I know on the back of every Baltimore City Public Schools, there was a rec center. We no longer have those rec centers on the back of our schools. Granted, we was blessed to work with the mayor's office and with Rex and Parks to open up Colleton Square in my district that's been closed for over 10 years. And what we're doing is we're using outsourced resources to help us with programming in these particular rec centers. Would you say to yourself, you've been a part of Baltimore City Public Schools for 15 years, I think I heard you say, would you say to yourself during those 15 years, currently to today, that, how would you think you would grade yourself on the achievements or underachievements of Baltimore City Public Schools? I myself fully do support, and I'll say it publicly, elected school board, so we can hold those individuals accountable, because I feel like the good old boy network is over. The good old girl network is over. We need to make sure that we're putting people in place that's going to make sure they have the best interest to our students, to our families. And the only way we're going to be able to do that is if we start meeting these kids where they are. Some of these kids don't have a place to go to once they leave schools. Or we even, getting resources to find out if he or she or them have a place to go after school. I look around in my district, the vacant homes that are around my school. There are no kids going to this school. Carlton Square, which is right there in my district, we're still trying to get kids to be a part of that school so we can grow that school. But because of the vacancies, and I'm not blaming it all on the Baltimore City Public Schools, and that's why I mentioned over and over again when we have these meetings that it has to be an all-hands-on approach in order for us to solve the issues that we have plaguing our neighborhoods. But if you could just give me a grade for yourself, how you feel, where you're at in these 15 years of Baltimore City Public Schools, what would you say?
So I would say, one, I've lived in Baltimore City for 15 years. I was chief academic officer for 3 of those years. I worked somewhere else for 3 of those years, and I've been sitting in the seat of chief executive officer for 7.5, soon to be 8 years. I think when we look at where the system was before, particularly over the 8 years, most recent 8 years, I think what you see now is far greater connection to those community resources. What you see now is after a pandemic, when other school districts have chronic absentee rates that are increasing year by year, and some with a similar demographic of Baltimore City, what you see is our chronic absentee rate has declined every year since we returned back to school, when in other urban areas it increases to 65 or 70% just south of us. I see a system that when I took over had 1 in 10 children reading at grade level, that now, even in the midst of a pandemic, is outpacing the growth for brown and black children who were particularly low across the state of Maryland, are now outpacing the growth of those same children across the state. What I see is a system in a city that did not invest in its schools now have Kirwan dollars because of advocacy of a number of people, but namely the leader of its school system, where we went from, when I first sat in this chamber as CEO, and we had just under probably 150 arts teachers in this school district, to now just about 300 because of that investment in arts. I now see community organizations and partners, not all who perfectly have access to schools, but many more who meet with me in their office because they actually do things, because they actually have solutions and they have space for solutions. I see 27 new schools that were built, and through the advocacy of my team, we now have additional 3 of the most historic schools in Baltimore City serving black children and brown children that will now be rebuilt because of that advocacy. I see a system where I took over that had 85 schools go down without heat and close to 100 schools with no air conditioning that, quite frankly, the city probably thought was okay prior to that, to now having less than 10, and in a year and a half we'll have 0. I now see a place where we have community schools, where we have wraparound services instead of purporting that we can educate young people from poverty and under-resourced, systematic under-resourcing, as documented in the history of this city through redlining, now actually have access to community school resources. I also see a city where the only high schools that had any kind of robust advanced programming, like advanced placement, College Board access, where we had no young people of color in an advanced placement calculus. Now, you walk through Poly, storied Poly, where when I took over, all of the advanced physics classes, there wasn't one single black male in that class, and I walked with the principal, Jackie Williams, and now that school, that AP Physics, AP Calc class is teeming with black, brown children. That's where we are now. I see a school district that had pre-K classrooms that looked like a paltry block corner in a doctor's office that now are, frankly, the boast of the state, because we had local funders who felt like there was enough, finally, enough stability within Baltimore City Public Schools to invest millions of dollars in Judy centers that serve some of our least resourced families in this city with early learning care. I also see a school district where funders backed off and sat in corners because they didn't want to fund a dysfunctional system in a questionable city under questionable management, who now are the boast internationally for millions of dollars of investment in the work that has led to a city that is in the top 10 for the number of young people that are going on to take and expand advanced programming in high school. So, no, is it a perfect city? Is it a perfect school system? Are there not issues? Absolutely there are. But I stand by that record. You want to grade me? I don't need to grade myself. I will never have the A until every single child in this school system is able to fully actualize their potential. We now have young people in Freddie Gray's neighborhood who know how to play a violin and who can take algebra in middle school. Because when I came, none of that was there. So I don't know what grade I'd give myself, and my dad would tell you I've never given myself A's because I come from a tradition of black excellence where you push until everybody is at that level. So no, we're not done. But I will tell you one thing, I walk the streets of this city, not everybody likes me, and frankly, I'm not here to be liked. Fortunately, I have a family that loves me, and I have a God that loves me. But I will tell you this, I have people in every neighborhood in this city who will tell me what they think needs to be done, and they know I will listen. And I defy anybody to tell me that this school system is not better off than when I took it. It's not perfect, and we got a long way to go. But nobody can tell me that this school system has not moved because of the team of people we have and where we found it. It is better funded, in part because we had to demonstrate to an entire state that we could take the funding and not have it caught up in some ridiculous scandal or not heading down to the schools. I can walk you through schools that had none of those resources before, and we make sure that those resources go to actual children. So I don't know how I would grade myself. You feel free to grade me. But I can put my head on my pillow every night and know whenever I leave here, I will have left this city, the city's kids, and these schools in a better place. That's my grade.
Thank you. Thank you for your response. So I say that to just ask, and you went off and you said a lot of great things about Baltimore City Public Schools. I mean, you and I have encountered over some years as well, and I've seen a lot of the work that you've done in our communities and our schools, which was some great work. But I wanted to just ask, because of folks asking me, you know, how do you grade yourself? And I think you gave us a wealth of information in reference to the work that you are doing and where you're trying to go. So again, thank you for your response.
Thank you. I want to thank Baltimore Police Department, State's Attorney's Office, Baltimore City Police, DGS, and especially those persons who actually spoke, and our young people who came up and spoke, and I think that's the important part. We need to bring them here all the time to talk about their experience in schools. This meeting is adjourned.